5 games you'll have to rip out of my cold dead fingers. Okay, so nothing quite as dramatic as that, but Jay over at Square Pegs has asked me to highlight 5 games that I keep going back to, games that I will never stop playing. And if you want to see what 5 games I've chosen, you just wait until after these. So hello friends and welcome back to Generation Pixel, and if you're new to the channel, well firstly, thank you for clicking on the video, and secondly, strap yourself in because you're about to experience 5 games I just can't put down. Games that I just love so much that I play time after time and will never get rid of them out of my collection. Now of course this challenge came from Jay over at Square Pegs, and the link will be in the description to Jay. You can go and check out his 5 straight after this video. But of course there will also be 5 tags. For every game I show today, I will call out another YouTube content creator and expect them to tell me what their 5 games that they can't put down are as well. Now for my selections of games, I'm going to start in reverse chronological order, in other words the newest game, and then working way to the earliest game. And the first game that I just can't put down is Yakuza Like a Dragon. Now the reason that I just can't put down Yakuza Like a Dragon is quite simply because, and this is despite the fact that the game is only 2 years old, one of the best classic JRPGs that I have played in a very long time. Actually, I could probably go back to Persona 5 before there was a game that hooked me in with classic JRPG mechanics and storytelling that gave me faith that developers out there are still willing to put the time in to give us these classic turn-based Japanese role-playing games that we all truly desire. Well, at least I truly desire them, as most of you out there will know. Now of course, it's not completely classic JRPG. The story is very Yakuza, and by that I mean it's slightly nuts. Well, not exactly slightly nuts, it's as nuts as a bag full of N64 controllers. And anyone who's had to experience the delights of trying to use one of those things will know exactly what I mean about how crazy this game can get in certain areas. Now it does have some very touching moments in it too. The story is solid from start to finish. There is a wonderful narrative line through there. The turn-based combat is absolutely solid. It's exactly what you would expect. No, I'm going to say this and put this out there now. If the Final Fantasy VII Remake had combat like Yakuza Like a Dragon, then Final Fantasy VII Remake would be one of the most beloved games of all time, and it would certainly be worthy of the name Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now I could talk about Yakuza Like a Dragon until the cows come home, but I've got 4 other games to get through, not to mention the people that are going to get tagged in these. And the person who's going to get tagged alongside Yakuza Like a Dragon, well, there's a kind of representative link there. I'm looking at a game that is classic and solid and well put together, high production values, but completely crazy as well. And the person I'm going to tag is Daft Blake. Now if you don't know Daft, then just drop down to the comments because the link will be in there. And of course Daft, I expect to see 5 games that you just can't put down in your own unique and fantastic style. So now for the second game that I just can't put down, it's a little bit older than Yakuza Like a Dragon, not by too much though, and that is Ninokuni Wrath of the White Witch. Now I would imagine most people out there know what Ninokuni Wrath of the White Witch is, what it's about, but if you don't, here's a simple summing up of the situation with Ninokuni and the Wrath of the White Witch. If the Final Fantasy and Pokemon franchise decided to have a baby and let Studio Ghibli dress it, well there's exactly what you have with Ninokuni Wrath of the White Witch. Now yes, it is another RPG. It's not quite classic turn-based RPG. The combat elements have a little bit more action to them. And despite the fantastic, heartwarming and very touching story that runs through Ninokuni Wrath of the White Witch, it was a slightly unique action yet still slightly turn-based combat that really drew me into this game. It looks fantastic, it's absolutely gorgeous, as you would imagine from anything coming from the likes of Studio Ghibli. Level 5 and Bandai Namco don't do too many bad games, so that was another plus side, and this was just one of those games that not only will I never stop playing it, The very first time I played it, this was one of those very few games where I didn't want it to end. I'm sure you know what I mean when you get to about 40 or 50 hours in and you're looking for that end game just to come in to wrap up a game. Well, with Ninokuni, Wrath of the White Witch, every time I was introduced to a new chapter in the story, I was just so glad it wasn't over yet. So yes, Ninokuni, without a doubt, a game that I will never stop playing. I can even just dip into this game, like most of them there, for just even an hour or two just to soak in the world. And when you're soaking in the gorgeousness of this Studio Ghibli world, then without a doubt it's a must play for anyone who loves RPGs, and even if you like a bit of anime. Now, who am I going to tag in for their 5? Well, the man who both loves and hates YouTube in equal measures, and that is none other than the wonderful thumbnail king himself, Super Jim Tendo. And if you don't know Super Jim already, which you should do, again the link will be in the description, and I want you all to call him out and make sure he puts together 5 games that he just can't put down. Now, the third game that I'm going to show to you that I just can't put down, the game that I love to go back to time and time again, is actually from a series that I love to go back to time and time again, and that's Suikoden 4. Now, I could have picked any of the Suikoden games out of this list, well, except for maybe 3, but that's a whole different video. But Suikoden 4 just doesn't get talked about enough. And over here in Europe, it was our first 3D Suikoden game. We had the releases of 1 and 2, but 3 for some reason didn't make it to Europe. Now, I'm not going to bemoan that too much because I'll be frankly honest with you, 3 wasn't exactly up to par. Well, not in my humble opinion anyway, but getting Suikoden 4 as our third game in the Suikoden franchise, well, it was just perfection. Because after being able to experience Suikoden 3 thanks to the PlayStation Store and the PlayStation 3, it was quite clear that with Suikoden 4, the developers had decided to go back to their roots and focus more on what had made Suikoden and Suikoden 2 such beloved games. And yes, as you've probably already clicked, it's another JRPG. And yes, this one is traditional turn-based again. And why not? Because that's the type of combat that I absolutely love, and I'm absolutely not ashamed to say so. Now, with Suikoden 4 in particular, it was the jump to 3D that was quite special, and it was something that was also going to have a bit of a struggle when it came to the transition, because the true hardcore fans of Suikoden and Suikoden 2 just loved those 16-bit pixel art graphics. But the love that was put into this PlayStation 2 game really does shine through. Now, I won't say it's quite as in depth as Suikoden 2 when it comes to the world building, but you do have to remember that the jump to 3D graphics also took up a lot of resources. But the story is in there. You do still have to chase down the 108 stars of destiny, and you do get a castle to build. Well, you sort of get a castle to build, but I'm not going to spoil it for you because JRPGs are all about the story, and I don't want to give too much of that away. So I'm absolutely not ashamed to say that Suikoden 4 is one of the games that I'll keep going back to, can't put down, and will never get rid of from my collection. Now, we have to move on to the next tag, and the next tag has got to have a sort of nautical theme, I think, and yeah, it's going to be Hawaii the Games. Now, that is the artist formerly known as Geordie Slasher Gaming, formerly known as GSG, formerly known as, well, he's Hawaii the Games, and please stick with us now, Mark, because I want to see 5 games that you just keep going back to time and time again. And I think you might struggle because you play something like 400 games in a year. You obviously don't have time to replay. So, tagging in for Suikoden 4, we have Hawaii the Games. So for game number 4, we're going further back in time, which means not only is it a game that I keep going back to, it's a game that I've been going back to for a very long time now. Anyone who knows me and anyone who knows this channel will know exactly what game it is that I love above most others, and that is Final Fantasy VII. Now, I don't need to tell anyone about Final Fantasy VII, because if you don't know about Final Fantasy VII in the year 2022 and you have been living on Mars without a TV, radio or even snail mail, because let me tell you, Final Fantasy VII is the greatest game of all time bar none, and for more than one reason. Now it's a very bold claim to make that Final Fantasy VII is the greatest game of all time, but you know what? It's a fair assessment to make. Now a lot of people out there might disagree, and they'll tend to point towards the low poly graphics and say that it's aged like a fish left out in the sun, but it's not all about the graphics. And yes, I understand that things have moved on since then, and I also understand that the early days of the 3D graphics on systems like the PlayStation and the Saturn didn't really stand the test of time, but they were a stepping stone on to where we are now, and you have to take that into consideration. But it's not all about the graphics. When we're talking about Final Fantasy VII, we have to talk about the story, and the story in Final Fantasy VII is one of the most beautiful and complex and touching stories that you will ever encounter in any JRPG. And the beauty of that is you can miss it all in your first playthrough. You can play this game from start to finish and hardly get a fraction of what this story has to deliver. And it's not just the story, the characters within the story. Each and every one of them is beautifully developed as the story progresses, and that's not even just the main characters. A lot of NPC characters out there in the world will have their own rich stories interwoven throughout the game that bring a level of detail to this game that I don't think we had seen before, and we haven't seen much of since. But the level of detail that was put into Final Fantasy VII, the level of complexity, and not just the story and the characters, but what you can do with the characters throughout the whole of the game is utterly mind-blowing. If you haven't properly experienced Final Fantasy VII, then definitely give it a go. There's so many ways to play it, but I'm going to stop talking about Final Fantasy VII now and tell you who's going to get tagged in with this game. And it's a classic game, and I'm looking for someone classic, someone original, someone honest, but for some reason I'm drawn to Fresh at Co-op of Nerds. And yes, he does love it when I tag him in these and give him extra work to do that he doesn't need. But Fresh, don't pull Mary in. This is for you and you alone. I want to see 5 games that you just can't put down, and your link will be in the description for people to hound you if you don't. Now last but not least is the oldest game on this list. It's a game that I absolutely love. I have loved it since 1982. That's quite a long while. I have been playing it since 1982, and that game is Orbiter on the ZX Spectrum. Now, I wouldn't imagine a lot of you out there know what Orbiter and the ZX Spectrum is. Well, it's quite simply a Defender clone, and please tell me you know what Defender is. It's one of the arcade classics from the 80s and was one of the first arcade games that I truly fell in love with and spent so much pocket change on that I could probably afford to buy my own Defender cab if I had that money back. But what made this version special, this Orbiter, it was just a Defender clone, but it was on the first system that I ever had, the ZX Spectrum. It plays fantastically well, so much like the arcade game. Obviously, the sounds and colours aren't quite there, but this was played on an 8-bit microcomputer, and I just can't take anything away from it. The gameplay is solid, and it's one of those rare games that I can just get totally immersed in and sit and play for hours without thinking about what I'm doing. So the last one, Orbiter, on the ZX Spectrum from all the way in 1982. Now I do have to tag my 5th and final tag into this, so I need someone that represents the era of this particular game, the feel of this particular game, and I'm going to go with 8BitRach. So 8BitRach, I want to see 5 games that you just can't stop playing. Your link's in the description so people can hound you if you don't put your video out. But I'm absolutely positive that Rach will get back to us because she's a big fan of the Amstrad CPC, and I'm not sure that 8-bit microcomputer has many more than 5 games for her to play on anyway. And yes, I'm just joking, Rach, don't at me down there in the comments. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and a big thanks to J8 Square Pegs for inviting me to take this particular challenge. And check out the links in the descriptions. The channels that I have tagged are fantastic channels. If you haven't seen them before, then they're a must, an absolute must, and a bit of variety from every single one of them. Thank you again for watching, and leaving you with a bit of Orbiter. Until next time, cheerio!